Hi, Keeble Cubs. Happy Thursday. Mrs. Hoffer here to work with you on your last English language knowledge lesson before your long weekend. Friends, I hope you are all ready to continue learning about Columbus, the Pilgrims, and the Native American people today. The goals of today's lessons, Keeble Cubs, are that you will know important facts about the Pilgrims and the Native American people. You will understand the type of relationship that the Pilgrim and the Native American people had with one another, specifically the Wampanoag tribe, the Native American tribe. And you will be able to draw a picture that shows your understanding of important events and things that happened after the Pilgrims had reached land. Friends, now we're going to learn another verse of the song that we have been learning so far in these last few units about Columbus and the Pilgrims and the Native American people. Friends, we're going to learn this new verse together, the lyrics we see here on the left of our page, and together we're going to sing it to the tune of I'm a Little Teapot. So follow along with me. I am the Mayflower, I'm the ship to take the Pilgrims on their trip. They are sailing west to the colonies so they can worship as they please. Good job, friends. Okay, friends, yesterday we had a read aloud where we learned all about the Pilgrims and how they sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean to come to the New World, to come to the Americas. Friends, we heard that these Pilgrims made something called a pilgrimage, which means a big journey across land for something that's usually religion-based. And they were called pilgrims when they went on this journey. But before this, they were called the separatists. And they were separatists because they didn't have the same religion, or they didn't want to practice the same religion as the king of England at the time, who forced his people in his country to practice the same religion under the Church of England. So, Keeble Cubs, they were separatists before they made the journey because they were separate and didn't want to follow the rules of England. And then they became pilgrims once they decided to take this pilgrimage or this big journey across the ocean to find new land and to find freedom. Keeble Cubs, can you tell me, was the ship that brought the Pilgrims to North America called the Mayflower? Thumbs up or thumbs down? That's right, friends. Good job. Thumbs up. The ship that brought the Pilgrims across the Atlantic Ocean was called the Mayflower. Good job. Thumbs up or thumbs down, Keeble Cubs? Was finding gold one of the dangers that the Pilgrims faced on their trip? Thumbs down. That's right. It wasn't a danger finding gold. It was just what they wanted to find. Keeble Cubs, thumbs up or thumbs down? Did the Pilgrims sail to the land of America in 1620? Thumbs up. That's right, friends. They did sail to the Americas in 1620 when they made their pilgrimage. Friends, remember, we learned about Native Americans in an earlier domain this year. The Native American people lived on the continents of North and South America long before the Europeans visited and ended up settling in this area. Keeble Cubs, do you remember anything that we've learned about Native Americans? Pause the video and tell me all the things you remember and the facts and important details about Native American people. Good job, friends. We learned a lot, such as that they all had different ways of eating, dressing, and living, and it's all dependent on the particular region. So what area of the countries that these tribes and their members lived. Good job. Keeble Cubs, in today's read aloud, we will hear a little bit more about a tribe that we have heard about earlier this year called the Wampanoag, who lived in Massachusetts. Okay, friends, we have arrived at today's read aloud section now. We're going to be reading a story called The Wampanoag. Remember, Keeble Cubs, we learned a little bit about this tribe previously in our Native American domain, as I just said earlier. After listening to today's story, friends, you should be able to describe the relationship between pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribal members. Make sure you pay extra close attention to the read aloud, Keeble Cubs, so you can hear all about what happens once the pilgrims reach land. Now let's read our story, the Wampanoag. The pilgrims anchored in a harbor off the coast of what we now call Massachusetts. According to legend, when they were looking for a good spot to land, they saw a huge rock sticking out of the water near the shore. Keeble Cubs, a legend is an often told story that may or may not be true. They used a little boat to get people off the big ship. Friends, do you remember what the pilgrims' big ship was called? The Mayflower. That's right. One of them exclaimed, "That rock is dry and level. It looks like the perfect place to go ashore without slipping." And so, one by one, the pilgrims climbed out onto the rock. They called it Plymouth Rock. Keeble Cubs, can you remind me, where have you heard the name Plymouth before? That's right. It was the name of the town in England where the pilgrims started their voyage. We heard about this in yesterday's read aloud. If you visit Massachusetts today, you can still see Plymouth Rock, or at least a rock that could have been Plymouth Rock. No one really knows. What we do know is that when the Pilgrims first landed in America, they slept aboard the Mayflower until they could decide on the best place to start their colony. After exploring for days, they found an acceptable site. Once they were all ashore, the first thing they did was to get down on their knees. "Let us raise a prayer to thank God for arriving safely in our new home," they said. Of course, it was not really a home yet. Much difficult work lay ahead. They gathered supplies from the Mayflower and, braving cold November winds, they set about clearing the land. They rushed to build log homes before the snow of winter came, and they decided upon a name for their new settlement. Keeble Cubs, the word log means something made from trees. They named their new settlement the Plymouth Colony. Keeble Cubs, tell me, why do you think they might have chosen the name Plymouth? One day, as the pilgrims were working in their new colony, two strangers stepped out from the forest. They stopped what they were doing and stared, fascinated by what they saw. Keeble Cubs, fascinated means very interested in something. The men did not look at all like them, and at first the pilgrims were alarmed by their appearance. The settlers stood quietly as the men came closer and closer. They must be Native Americans, they thought to themselves. Were they friends or enemies? They weren't too sure. Then one of the strangers smiled. Suddenly, the sense of danger was gone. One of the men introduced himself as Samoset and told the colonists that English people who lived in Plymouth Colony that he was a member of the Wampanoag, a tribe of Native Americans. A few days later, Samoset reappeared with the men who would turn out to be the Pilgrims' greatest friends. "I am Tisquantum," he told them. "I am of the Wampanoag people, and I have come to help you." He held out his hand in friendship to them, and one by one, the colonists stepped forward to shake his hand. Tisquantum, or Squanto, as he was called, was able to talk to the pilgrims because he spoke English. When he was younger, he was forced by Spanish explorers to go to Spain with them. He was able to get free and travel to England, where he learned how to speak English. He was then able to get back to his home country. The pilgrims did not yet know it at this point, but life was about to get much, much easier. Their lives would get easier in part because Squanto was not the only Wampanoag who helped them. The Wampanoag sachem, or chief, became a great and important friend to the colonists. The chief's name was Massasoit. This is him on the page here. Massasoit gave the colonists his word that the Wampanoag tribe would gladly share their land as long as the colonists took care of it. "We will teach you how to live in harmony with nature," he told them. Being on friendly terms with the Wampanoag was very important to the Pilgrims' survival. Keeble Cubs, why do you think that the Pilgrims' survival was dependent on the Wampanoag tribe? In other words, why do you think the Pilgrims need the help of the Wampanoag Native Americans, the people who were native to the land that the Pilgrims just arrived at? I hope you enjoyed today's read aloud story, Keeble Cubs. Now, let's move on to some questions to check our understanding of the read aloud we just heard. Friends, can you tell me what was the main topic or main idea of this lesson? What do you think? That's right. We've been hearing about how the Pilgrims entered a strange new land and needed help from the native people to be able to survive in this new land that they arrived in. Good job, friends. Keeble Cubs, can you tell me what is the legend of Plymouth Rock? What did we hear about this? What's the legend of Plymouth Rock? Good job, friends. The legend of Plymouth Rock is a traditional story told about the Pilgrims first landing in the New World on a rock near the shoreline. So this is where they landed. Good job, friends. Can you tell me, Keeble Cubs, how did the Pilgrims feel when they first saw Samoset come out of the forest? And why did they feel this way? That's right, my friends. The Pilgrims were both fascinated and afraid because he looked different from them, and they were not sure if he was their friend or their enemy. Good job, friends. Keeble Cubs, can you tell me to which tribe of Native American people did Chief Squanto belong? And where did he live? That's right, they were members of the Wampanoag tribe. He lived in Massachusetts near the Plymouth colony. Good job, friends. Now, Keeble Cubs, can you tell me why was Chief Squanto able to talk to the Pilgrims in their own English language? Why do you think? That's right, my friends. Good job. He had been forced to go to Spain, but then got to England where he learned the English language. He then returned to Massachusetts after this. Keeble Cubs, I want you to pause the video to tell me and answer the question I'm about to ask. In the read aloud, we heard the Pilgrims needed the Wampanoag in order to survive. Keeble Cubs, can you pause the video and tell me some of the ways that the Pilgrim people might have needed the Wampanoag people to survive? What do you think? That's right, my friends. There are lots of different reasons why they might have needed them to survive, such as the Pilgrims were unfamiliar with this area of land where they had settled, so they needed help to find things like food, shelter, and more things that we need for survival. And the Wampanoag were familiar with this area because they lived there, so they then could help the Pilgrims. Fantastic work, friends. Friends, in this story you heard, the Pilgrims were fascinated by what they saw. Say the word fascinated with me. Fascinated. Good job. Fascinated, Keeble Cubs, means being very interested in something. For example, I am fascinated by rainbows. I just have to stop and stare whenever I get to see one. Keeble Cubs, I want you now to pause the video and tell me about something that you are fascinated about. When you're responding to me, Keeble Cubs, answer like by saying, I am fascinated by, and then tell me what you're fascinated by. Good job, Keeble Cubs. Thanks for sharing the things that you were fascinated by with me. Remind me, friends, what is the word we've been talking about? That's right, friends. Fascinated. Good job. Friends, the opposite of fascinated is bored. Bored, Keeble Cubs, means to not be interested in something. I'm going to read some sentences describing different situations. If the situation describes someone who is fascinated, say, she or he is fascinated. If it does not describe someone who is fascinated, so somebody who is bored, you say, he or she is bored. Let's get started. Miguel whined that he was tired of waiting in line at the grocery store. Good job, friends. He was bored. Lakeisha's baby sister giggled and smiled every time Lakeisha shook a colorful rattle. Good job, friends. Lakeisha's sister was fascinated. What about I'm interested in the book about castles that I don't even want to stop reading and eat dinner? Good job, friends. I am definitely fascinated. And lastly, I fell asleep in the car on the way to my aunt's house because there was nothing to see out the windows. Good job, friends. I was bored. That's right. Okay, friends, earlier this week we were introduced to a timeline and how by using a timeline we can see different dates throughout history, and over these dates we can label important events that happened. So we can see all the time and how much time in between there was from important events. So as you can see, the first one here starts in 1492. Columbus made his first voyage westward. And then it goes up on all these bars by 100 years, which is called a century. And right after 1600, in 1607, we added Jamestown started because that's when we learned that it was founded in an earlier lesson, over 100 years after Columbus made his first voyage to the New World. Now, Keeble Cubs, we also see here 2021. We are here over 500 years after Columbus first discovered this land. Keeble Cubs, now we see that we have added something additionally to our timeline. We have added the year 1620 right after 1607 and before the year 1700. And in 1620, we learned in today's read aloud, the Pilgrims sailed to North America. So that was a very, very important date and piece of information, the event that the Pilgrims sailed to North America. So we added it to our timeline, and we can see it was 13 years after Jamestown started and over 100 years again after Columbus made his journey westward. Good job, friends, reviewing our timeline. Okay, friends, we are almost done with today's knowledge lesson. But before we go, I want to touch up on some important details and information that we learned about the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe in today's read aloud. Because, friends, after we finish this lesson here, you should be able to use this information that we learned about the relationship they had and to draw a picture that describes this relationship in your travel journals, Keeble Cubs. So to begin, tell me, what are some of the things you learned about in today's read aloud? There are many different answers. Good job, friends. There are several really important things we learned about in today's read aloud. Some of these things include that the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts at a place called Plymouth Rock. That's the first place they set foot on land in the Americas. They started a settlement they called the Plymouth Colony. They met two Native Americans from the Wampanoag tribe called Samoset and Squanto. And the Wampanoag told the Pilgrims that they could share their land if they would take care of it. And really importantly, The Wampanoag people helped the Pilgrims to survive on this new land that the Wampanoag people had lived on for a very long time. All right, friends, we should be able to use this information now to draw a picture in our travel journal that describes the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe. Great job finishing today's English language knowledge lesson. Have a great long weekend, Keeble Cubs, and I'll see you next time.